So with that, we will get kicked off here. Alicia, next slide, please. Okay, thanks. So just a few introductions real quick. The staff that are on this call and behind the scenes supporting this program. Mimi Weber is a program manager for special projects, and she's the State Hazard Mitigation Officer for 4480, which is COVID. That mitigation grant is being run through the Office of Special Projects. Marlene White is the State Chief of Hazard Mitigation Programs here at DHSES. She's also the HMO, State Hazard Mitigation Officer, is that acronym from the first line, HMO as we call it. For the other DRs, Steve Bornt is a Hazard Mitigation Program Manager here at DHSES. My name is Thad Ligamores. I'm a Hazard Mitigation Program Lead here, working mainly on 4480, and I'll be your host today. Beth Peck is part of our application development. She's the team lead for that. So as these applications come in, her team will be working to get them buttoned up with you into FEMA at the final deadline. And then we have Prabnor Mutani, who is app development, also benefit cost analysis specialist, along with Diaz and Suprit Singh. So, and there's a lot more staff behind the scenes helping you guys out. So next slide, please. So this is just a table and crosswalk of the 3 different grants, and I should have started out this call by saying that you would get, we're going to email these slides out to those that participated at the conclusion, so you will get this for reference, but this is just sort of a breakdown between the 3 different grant opportunities. The main thing is they're all due June 1st, so this is a single deadline day for all of them. The way that it is with state procurement law, though, if you want to apply to multiple, which we encourage you to apply to at least 2, which I'll talk about in a minute, you would just need to send those same applications. You just do one application to 2 separate email addresses. That's to meet the New York State procurement requirements. However, beyond the differences in the notice of funding opportunity and these how you apply, basically the grants are the same. It's the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. So the available funding under COVID is $315 million. Under Ida is $43 million, and under FRED is $4.3 million. The eligibility are basically statewide, local governments, Indian governments, and certain private not-for-profits. So that's true for all 3 grants across the board. For Ida, there will be some priority given to counties that were declared for Ida, but it is not mandatory. So other municipalities that were not in an Ida county can still apply for Ida funds. And then FRED, being the smallest, those ones are limited to the declared counties only. So only counties there that you see listed as declared under FRED can apply to FRED. So what that means to most is we again, it gives us and you the most flexibility if you apply to multiple sources. So for non-FRED counties, we would hope that people would apply to both COVID and Ida, and FRED counties, we would hope that they would apply to both COVID and FRED. The activities are generally the same for all of them, with the exception of planning. There's no planning related funding associated with FRED. All other project categories are eligible. So if you're looking for planning, please apply under Ida or COVID. The cost share, we still do have to officially list the cost share on COVID at 75-25 because the final agreement hasn't been signed between the state and FEMA. That is imminent, however, so we are telling everyone, please do your budgets at 90-10. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't have the final contract between the state and FEMA signed, any day now. So those will be 90-10, but as of right now, we still have to officially say it's 75-25. And then the application due date across the board is June 1st. Next slide, please. And here's just a summary again of the due dates. Again, same date for all, anytime on or before June 1st. If you're submitting to COVID, you would apply to the HMGP 4480 email address. And if you're applying to FRED or Ida, it would be to the hazard mitigation at dhses.ny.gov. And again, we would, if you were applying to say Ida and FRED, I'm sorry, Ida and COVID, you simply send in your application to those both email addresses, stressing that you're applying, and it's just a single application. You don't have to do the whole application twice. Next slide, please. Here's the summary. Again, the official, the particulars off the NOFO as it relates to Ida. Again, that's $40 million available for projects, 2 plus 2.8 for planning. The priorities statewide for all of these NOFOs, generally speaking, is the vulnerable populations, protecting vulnerable populations, addressing climate change, mitigating the risk to repetitive loss structures and critical infrastructure, and of course your planning updates and activities. For Ida, you also see the added caveat that priority will be given to those counties declared for Ida. Next slide, please. This is COVID 4480. Oh, I think there we go. COVID, that's the big one, 293 million for projects, 22 million for planning. Again, due 6/1 to the HMGP 4480 email box. This one is the sort of most broad. It's for vulnerable populations, climate change, mitigate risk to repetitive loss structures and critical infrastructure, and there is no geographical limitation or priorities given statewide. Next slide, please. And finally, we have Fred, which is the smallest. That is 44.3 million for projects only, limited only to those municipalities located in those counties that you see there. But beyond that, it's the same priorities for the other projects, which is vulnerable populations, climate change, and repetitive loss / infrastructure. Next slide, please. This is, again, a summary of the hazard mitigation program, where it comes from, which is the Stafford Act, but it's more importantly a link to the Hma Unified Guidance 2015, which is the Bible, the manual for this grant program. So it's embedded here as a link. So if you need to find it, you can obviously Google FEMA HMA 2015, you'll find it, but this will provide you a link to that guidance. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, quick overview of the eligible activities. We've covered this at length in other webinars, but just a sort of laundry list of the eligible mitigation activities that you can do under these grants: buyouts and demo, and/or relocation. It's exactly what it sounds like. You're buying out homes that are prone to flooding, removing them, demolishing them, and turning the land green in perpetuity. If it was, say, a historic structure, you had another lot to relocate it to, you could physically move the building while still buying out the lot and turning it into green space. Elevating structures. If we had a large, if there was a big population of homes destroyed by a flood, mitigation reconstruction may be an option. It's not really relevant to this grant program, but it is eligible under this under HMGP. Dry flood proofing of historical residential structures or non-residential structures. Generators for critical facilities, including healthcare facilities. FEMA has made it easier for hospitals to apply for generators. Localized and non-localized flood risk reduction projects. These are your sort of bread and butter: culverts, drainage projects, retention, those kind of things. Structural retrofitting of existing buildings, and non-structural retrofitting. This is, generally speaking, more around hurricane winds, but it's or seismic loading. This is structural retrofitting of buildings to make them to make them stronger. Wind retrofit for 1 or 2 family residences. Those are private structures. It's a hurricane type program. Basically, hurricane shutters, that type of stuff. Infrastructure retrofit, again, more relevant in New York State. You see a lot of this. This is where you're armoring street banks to protect a road or utilities, basically protecting your horizontal construction. Soil stabilization is one of those methods. Wildfire mitigation, which, again, thankfully we don't do a lot of around here. Post-disaster code enforcement, again, probably not too relevant here. And that's in big flooding events when you want to change your code enforcement rules and then enforce them. Miscellaneous other is one we expect to see a lot of. This is The outside the box category, for those that aren't otherwise listed here, we have some interesting ones around heat heat wave protection and cooling, those kind of things. But FEMA does allow for sort of outside the box that comes in under miscellaneous other. It requires a lot more sort of massaging and working together. So if you have any of those, again, we appreciate you. Speak up now, reach out to us, because we can certainly help you prior to the deadline, try to flush that out. And finally, planning. Your updates, enhancements, and activities, of course, are eligible and a big part of especially the COVID disaster funding. Next slide, please. Best practices for your development of your scope. Again, we just want to stress again, make your showing how your project lines up with the priorities of the NOFO. Social vulnerable populations, climate change, protecting critical infrastructure. You want to line up your grant with what the NOFO is, basically. A detailed scope of work that really is paints a picture, tells the story. The first stop for these projects is for us, and we need to understand them. And then FEMA, who is again New York City, they're removed from the situation here in Albany, so they're going to need it's got to be self-contained. So the more of the narrative you can clearly show what the issue you're trying to mitigate is, how what you're doing mitigates that, and the wonderful outcomes that you will have because of that. Again, and you're certainly detailed as best you can your budget and timeline. The three big parts of the project are the same as they always are: scope, schedule, budget. So really identifying that scope, schedule, and budget in your application, and make it so it's very understandable for someone to pick up and read is important. And then the more supporting documentation, the better, right? Maps, and we should have specifically listed pictures here, but pictures, they tell 1,000 words. And then again, clear, consistent, relevant data that you can use to support your project. Next slide, please. The cost share, again, so this is a federal grant with a federal and local cost share requirement. So FEMA, again, this is unprecedented. It's the first time in my memory that HMGP has gone over 75%. It certainly happened with public assistance quite a lot, but so it's a unique opportunity to take advantage of. Again, that reduces your local match to 10%, which can be done with in-kind services. Your in-kind labor, equipment, time is always big, and materials, off-the-shelf materials. And of course, other other federal funds cannot be used towards your non-federal match. So, for example, you couldn't use a DOT project to be your local match on an HMGP project. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we get into questions, I just want to, again, make sure that everyone is aware of our technical assistance points of contact. Again, we have 3 open grants, so sorry for the various points of contact and phone numbers, but any one of them will get you through to the team to get you helped. For 4480, you see the email address there, HMGP 4480, and the phone number, and then in the hazard mitigation unit, the email address and the phone number. Please reach out if you have questions, especially if we get into the, we'll try to get into specifics on this call in the Q and question and answer as much as possible. But generally, if you have, if you're far along in your project and you need detailed assistance, we are standing by to give technical assistance. We can do that right up until the deadline. We have a team of people to help statewide. So with that, I am going to get into the Q&A. And like I said, I am going to read through the questions, give answers, and then I'm sure that'll probably generate some additional questions. But you can start to then, as I get through these, and the questions, I get towards the bottom, we'll start to go verbal and hands up, so you can start to put your hands up. So Stephanie Brewer asked, good morning. Should we put 150 or 160,000 accounting for the management costs for the requested amount? Is our total budget 200,000 or 210,000? It is the total. It's the total of your project plus your management costs on top of that. So you'll see a construction form on the budget form we asked you to put your management costs on line 18. So what Stephanie is talking about here is you can have up to 5%. You can get up to 5% of the project costs additional in management costs, and those are costs associated with managing the grant. So anything having to do with dealing with applying for or managing quarterly reports, payment requests, those kind of things. Managing the grant is an eligible cost, and that can be reimbursed, and that's at 100% cost share. That just simply goes into the budget as its own item. And we are joined here again by Marlene White, who is our head of the mitigation unit, chief for New York, and so has a lot more experience with the actual budget form and how it's filled out. Marlene, can you give any more detail? I want to make sure we're getting this question correct on how to fill out that budget form.
Yeah, within the actual sub-application, you will have more detailed cost out, and then you'll combine them and put them on the 2015 for construction project submissions and the 2020 for non-construction activities. And excuse me, on 4615 and 4625, I believe in those sub-application packages, there is an additional 2015 where you can break out the management costs at on a separate budget, so that you'll show the 100% on the management costs, and you'll show the 90% on your original budget for your proposed project.
Thank you, Marlene. And Stephanie, I think at the end of the day, we realize sometimes it's not FEMA, the process has changed over the years, and it may not be the most intuitive, which we apologize for. But if you clearly indicate in your grant that you're seeking management costs, we will make sure that is included in the budget. And if it's if it needs any tweaking, we will work that out through the RFI process. But as Marlene says, there's a place for you to include it right in the grant application. Okay, we have Stephanie Brewer asking on the non-construction budget form 10J, what are considered indirect charges? So in the case of the non-construction budget form, as I recall, has a line, one of the embedded line items for indirect costs, right? So basically what you in the HMGP grant, and again, this is confusing, this is why the whole process is changing and going to FEMA Go in the fall, because it's sort of not all the paperwork is caught up with itself. But at any rate, under HMGP, you wouldn't want to list anything as an indirect cost. You just would flush it out. You have management costs, which we show you go on line 18, and you'd want to include everything else in those other line items. Marlene, would you agree with that statement?
Yes, I would, Doug.
Thank you. Yep. So again, this budget form is standard across the federal government. It's kind of gets wonky some points, but just avoid the indirect line item and make sure all your costs are included as regular construction line items. For hazard mitigation updates, undoubtedly, we will assess all applicable hazards, but are we allowed to go into more detail analysis on certain hazards that pose the greatest risk, such as flooding? And Brian's answer was a good question. If you have enough within the available funding or want to supplement your funding, that should work. You could also consider an enhanced sub-application. So good answer, Brian. I think that's where the sort of, so I think the answer is yes, you can certainly do this. It just depends on what stage is your county at with your plan update. If you're in the cycle for getting your full plan updated in this cycle, then I certainly would want to just make sure that you're planning on that as part of that update cycle, what you want to do for your community, because you're going to do as part of you make sure it's covered as part of your annex. Otherwise, it would be, if it's an outside of cycle, it would be what we would call, if you're going to do it at the county level, an enhanced plan. Again, as Brian said, you could enhance your plan by, even though it doesn't need to be updated now, adding to it. That's at the county level. We have that enhancement in that update category. If at the local level you want to just tackle this on your own and so that you're ready, and you sort of direct that yourself, and then have it ready for the next time the county goes to do the update, then that's would be a planning activity, which would be competitive, which would compete against all planning activities. But again, there's 22 million available. I strongly encourage you to take advantage of that. And certainly, if you need more guidance, please reach out to us. Brian has put the contact info, and it's in these slides and on the screen as you see it. Please reach out. We can flush out your question in more detail. For DR 4480 is the CFDA number for HMP update 9. Okay, that's a very technical question. Brian looked up the answer, and it's correct. So we're talking about the code. Yes, 97.039 is correct. Barbara Johnston, for the BCA for a sewer pump station backup generator, FEMA has a per person value for days without sewer service, but in practice, if the pump station isn't operating because the power went out, people still flush their toilets. Sometimes this results in overflows at the pump station. We can calculate the man hours and equipment required for cleanup, but can we also use the per day value for people being without wastewater service? And I'm looking at who do we have? Who's on our BCA team standing by with questions? Prabnor or Suprit? Do you want to come on and take a crack at that answer for me?
Sure. Good morning. Yeah, for wastewater, you do have a unit value of $58 a day, and you can use that times the number of customers served. And then in addition to the cleanup, you can calculate the man hours and equipment cost as optional damages in category 1. That would be right next to the impact days. So that would calculate the loss of water waste plus the additional cleanup cost.
Great, thank you. And again, if you guys, it sounds certainly, Barbara, you've been coming to these webinars and asking all kinds of great questions. It sounds like you're getting very close on your application. If you want to schedule, one-on-one for the team just to sit with you and go through as you have questions in real time, we can certainly do that too. But we appreciate you coming on and bringing your great questions. The next one, will the written responses to the Q&A be available later? Yes, we have. So we have 2 of these webinars that we did Tuesday and today. Once we get through today, we can we pull those questions and sort of consolidate them, and we can get them blasted out to the participants. Stephanie Brewer, understanding New York State wants to make a shift towards digital plans. Should we account for this in your budget? I'm going to turn this one over to Marlene. Marlene, do you have my thought is that certainly if it's your plan and it's an eligible activity under planning and that's how you want to see your plan go, you would put that in your application. But obviously Marlene's been doing this a lot longer in the state than I am. Marlene, are you available to take that one, or did we lose Marlene? All right. Well, she is probably caught up on another conflicting priority that came through her door, I'm guessing. So I'm going to stick with my answer on that, is that, digital plans are certainly happening. They're online. So if you're talking about, the cost it would take to go to a digital plan on a platform that, is as opposed to just a static PDF or a 3-ring binder, certainly that has been included in plans in the past. Winsome Gordon asked, the presenter indicated that we only have to fill out one application to access both grant opportunities, meaning the 4480 and the 4615. Can this same application be used for 2 different projects? So there's I want to just make sure I get the answer right, make sure I get your question right first. If you're asking me if you have several projects within the town or the community, can you put them all just on one application, or do they have to be on separate applications? If that is your question, the answer is that if it's the same mitigation activity or a single mitigation project, it can go on a single application. So what does that mean? So let's say you were doing, 5 or 6 culverts, which is the same activity in your, town or city. Those could all go on a single application. If it's a single drainage project, well, let's say that includes some drainage pipes, a berm, and some other things, but it's all one part. You need all those parts put together to make the mitigation work. That is a single project. What you can't do is put your culverts together with your elevations. Two completely different projects, two completely different mitigation activities. So I hope that answers your question. But you do get some economies of scale. If, let's say, again, you had a bunch of generators or a bunch of culverts or a bunch of elevations, they could all go on a single application. However, if it's different activities and unrelated to each other, they must go on separate applications. Colin Barrett, for a new hospital building in New York City that is in design phase, would the emergency generators be eligible? So, Brian has given you sort of the straightforward answer, not until the project is complete. The mitigation action needs to be standalone, not contingent upon other actions. So that is accurate. That's certainly the case. But again, because you're in the planning stages of this hospital, there's other grant cycles coming down the road. We'd love to talk to you. That there might still be other opportunities, if not this grant cycle. But please reach out if you'd like to discuss further. Katrina, will this recording be available? I'm having technical difficulties and cannot hear the presentation. I apologize for that. Yes, we will have. We'll get it taken care, get it done and on the website. That takes a little bit. These things don't happen overnight, but and we do sometimes we can email them. Depends on people receiving email. Sometimes firewalls don't allow that size through, but we'll definitely get it out to you. Dan Theobald asks, is there a source that recommends variables for the expected damages after mitigation in the BCA calculator, specifically for a generator or undergrounding power lines? I'm going to turn this over to our BCA team. Typically the damages after mitigation, and for the audience, that means when you're doing your benefit cost analysis, unless the mitigation is a buyout, which means everything, there is no sort of residual structures or facilities left in harm's way, everything can experience damage if you get beyond a certain threshold. So, for example, if you put in a 100-year culvert or culverts that handle a 100-year storm, at the 500-year level, you would expect some damage to be reintroduced. So FEMA makes you include some kind of after mitigation cost or damages that would come in once your mitigation level is exceeded. Generally speaking, it's sort of your opinion. It's based on the applicant's opinion. But I'll turn it over to Suprit if you have any better answer than that, Suprit, for what exactly FEMA is looking for expected damages after mitigation on the generator or underground power lines.
Yes, for generators, the level of protection is based on the probability of the generator's failure. So typically for the 19-year pull life, FEMA standard values that there's a 5% chance that the generator will fail, and that would result in a 1-day power outage. So FEMA standard expected damages after mitigation for generator is a 5% chance failure that equals 1 impact day. So that equals to, there's a equation that I guess we can send out that FEMA has calculated. So the reoccurrence interval is 371 and impact day of 1.
All right, great. Maybe we can include that information in the email blast, or maybe put it in the chat for Super. Anything you want to put in the chat now, and then we will make that way, or let's do it in the Q&A, because that way it'll go out with the Q&A once we get it cleaned up.
Sure.
Okay, let's see. Is there a minimum grant cap award, minimum grant award cap associated with the maximum, sorry, is there a maximum grant award cap associated with this program? No, there is not, and there's no maximum numbers of applications that you could submit either. Let's see, we got a question here. Apologies, I might have missed when this was explained earlier. Is it correct that we can submit just one sub-application from the different grant opportunities such as 4480 and 4615? If so, how should we indicate we are submitting for both grants and not just for one? So great question. So yes, you would. So if you're submitting, so there's two different email addresses. To submit to COVID, it's the 4480@dishs.ny.gov. If you're submitting to Ida or Fred, you would submit to the other email address, the hazard mitigation at DHSES.NY.gov. Basically, just attaching your application and indicating in the email itself that you're applying for that grant. I haven't gone so far as to say, hey, just send one email and list both addresses. I think it's better to send two separate emails. But that's what I would do. I would just send an email to the one email address with the application saying, let's say if you're applying to, both Ida and Fred, you would send an email address or an application to that email address indicating, please consider these as applications for this one or both of them. And then for 4480, forward the same, take the same email, just send it to 4480, say, please consider this for funding under 4480. Again, we apologize, it's not the most high-speed system, but because FEMA is going to move HMGP to FEMA Go starting later this year, we just made the decision to not try to reinvent the wheel for this one. So it's a little wonky, but as long as you get that application emailed by those deadlines to those email addresses, just put in the body of the email, hey, I'm applying to this, we will figure it out. It's us receiving it. So if we receive an email from you, we'll make sure that we get it counted. So let's see.
This is Brian.
Yeah, sure.
One question in the chat that didn't make it in the Q&A, so I wanted to say it out loud because I didn't have a good answer for it.
Okay, sure.
It says, I'm applying for a generator and the power company is not giving me my past days of outages. How can I input the number of days?
That's an interesting question where we're not getting the data that we need from the power companies. Suprit, or Prob, any experience there when you're just not able to get what you need?
Haven't had that issue come up before.
How about Marlene? You're obviously been around the state much longer than we have. Is this a problem in New York? Have you had any issues with power companies, or do you have any hints? I think Marlene may still be tied up on another call. We'll do our best to help you. Each company is different. If it's NYSEG or National Grid or whoever, and if it's a municipality owned or managed power, it can be even harder. So, you can, I would suggest you reach out to us to try to set up a one-on-one. We'll see what we can do to try to guide you or send you in the right direction, or see if we can come up with another source.
I wonder, Thad, too, if they have any records of outages as a baseline to say, hey, we know we have outages on these days. Maybe there's a way to put that into the system and see if you're getting close or not on your numbers.
Oh, it's RG&E, it looks like. Okay.
It's a separate issue, separate person. So
yeah, okay. Right. So, but I see it as a sort of a theme out there of issues we're having. All right. Well, so I think this is one that we should, it's a specific question we should put our heads together, take up and see if we can get any kind of guidance for this specific source. All right. At this point, we've gone through, unless Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we've hit all of the written questions, and we are happy to continue to take written questions, or if you have, a question, you just want to put your hand up, we will be able to see that in the chat. And any questions?
It's like a new one came in from Colin Bell. That
Oh, okay, here we go. Yes, thank you. What is anticipated timing of awards under this program, assuming approval? If an applicant proceeds with a project in advance of grant agreement execution, will costs be eligible for reimbursements? It's a good question. So the first answer is we anticipate FEMA beginning to make awards in early next year. They've told us it's going to be that kind of timing. They have processes they have to go through. They're saying about 4 to 6 months to start to see awards. We might see some lower hanging fruit go sooner. That said, you would be well aware of where you are in the process up until sitting in the FEMA review queue. There's several stages. There's our initial review and RFI process where we determine if projects are eligible, and if we get complete information. Then they get ranked and scored by the state executive team, and then from there, those that are reviewed and scored, we go to FEMA, and then we'd wait for FEMA approval and award. So you're probably looking at next construction season, is what we've been telling people. But we would keep you abreast of where you are in the process. Through that process, it wouldn't be like you submit in June and wait to hear anything until that point. And to your second part of your question, which was if you do work before you execute the agreement, yes, then unfortunately it's ineligible for shovel work. If you were to do certain pre-award costs are eligible and can be reimbursed once the project is awarded, but that's all non-shovel work. So design, your time to put together the application, those kind of things are all eligible once you get the award, but you can't do shovel work. If you do shovel work, it's ineligible, unfortunately. FEMA has to be able to do their Environmental Historic Preservation Review, EHP as we call it. If we are submitting for multiple projects and planning initiatives, can we submit them all in one email, or does each application need to be submitted separately? That has not ever been asked. My thought would be it's probably prudent to send separate emails, just with separate projects. Certainly they couldn't be on the same application anyway. So I don't think there's any hard and fast rule that says thou shalt do them on separate emails. I think it's probably just prudent, good practice, just to send them. But again, if both came in on a single email and they arrived safely and it was clear and we clearly delineated in the email, we were able to easily discern that, they would count. Let's see here.
Chad, I would just add a caveat that
Go ahead.
some of the applications, the supporting documentation is really large, especially when it comes to projects. So you may not be able to do one email with all of your applications just simply because it may be too big to send.
Yeah, good point, Beth. And also if you're, have several, a lot of backup documentation, you might have it zipped, but it just could get confusing. I don't want to say that there's a rule, but my strong recommendation would be separate emails. All right, let me just make sure I'm jumping down to the questions. Let's see. Good. How do you calculate the benefit of replacing multiple culverts? So each structure is entered separately, but I'm going to kick it over to Supreet to take a crack at that one. How do you calculate the benefit of replacing multiple culverts?
So culverts are viewed as drainage improvement projects that would measure, decreasing flood risk by lowering the water levels in the surrounding area. There's more information needed, so I can guide you a little better how to set up the BCA, the analysis, because there's multiple ways, especially for culverts. But having additional information is going to be needed here just to guide you in the right direction.
All right. Thank you, Supreet. Again, we please reach out. That question came to us from Norman Allen. Norman, we're happy to jump on a call and talk through, your culvert questions with you specifically. Tracy McLee, based on your PowerPoint presentation, can you provide us with concrete examples of what cost sharing would look like? I am applying for generator funding. Sure, Tracy. So let's say you were going to do some of the site work in-house. You were going to have your DPW guys or staff, clear the, level for the pad, do all the site work while you would charge their fully burdened labor rate, you would budget for, and their and then charge their fully burdened labor rate, which is cost plus fringe, their equipment time based on FEMA cost codes or your own internal cost codes for equipment if you have it, and then any, if you may have pulled any materials off the shelf, like gravel or something from stock, those kind of things. You would set up a budget. So basically what you do is you have a whole budget for your entire grant, and what you would do is try to establish in-kind services that account for 25% of that total cost. Basically is how you would do it. And that's typically staff time and equipment time. And equipment time can add up fast because it's basically it's not a it's a you've already paid for or are paying for the equipment. So you just charge the time that you use it, and that can really go a long way towards counting towards your local match. Let's see, make sure I don't miss any questions. Gotcha. Are school districts eligible for HVAC improvements under DA? So unfortunately, no, this would not an eligible activity under HMGP. Again, we're happy to flush out any questions we have with anybody in a one-on-one call. But this one certainly jumps out as not sounding like an eligible activity. It's not mitigating a natural hazard. I know we are all very in tune with air quality from COVID, but we still have not gotten any real strong concrete guidance from FEMA on the ability to pivot toward this grant towards more let's call it air quality type projects. For the backup documentation, we have several large reports to accompany the applications. We need to submit it multiple times for each application then. Would it be best to submit everything in a zip file together? Rebecca, good question. Yes, and again, we don't unfortunately have like a file sharing site. Zip files could work. If you're able to, if you get us the bulk of it by the deadline, and even if you had to put some of those folders on a thumb drive or a disk, and send them to FedEx them to us or email them to us, and as long as you mail them out by the deadline, we don't need to necessarily receive it. There's ways around it, making sure we get all the documentation. We can work with you ahead of time. Zip files will certainly work. We just want to make sure that they go through, just make sure that email comes through. But again, we realize that it's not the best system, so we're going to work with everybody to make sure that that we get your files received by the deadline. Okay. How to install BCA toolkit is by using agency's email account ? Or agency prohibits installing apps toolkit from Microsoft Store. So this is a more of a sort of IT question. I'm not sure that we're the best to answer this. I know that we have had several questions come in about technical difficulties around trying to get the BCA toolkit working. I would say that the BCA helpline is probably a better source, but just to see if we can nail this one down real quick.
I can take this question.
Yeah, there you go.
I would recommend speaking to your IT department if it's prohibiting you to have any add-ins from the Microsoft Store. If you continue, if that's difficult and the IT department isn't able to give you access to get that add-in, FEMA recommends to utilize the Excel Online as an alternative to get access into the BCA calculator. So that I think that I would recommend speaking to your IT department, and then second, I would recommend using Excel Online.
Great, thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. All right, so I think we have, Brian, unless I missed any, which is certainly possible, I think we've come to the end of the written questions. Do we have any?
Yeah, Barbara looks like she's got her hand raised. Barbara, do you want to unmute yourself? Thanks for your patience, by the way.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
I can also do it if that's okay with you. So you're now unmuted, Barbara.
Thank you.
Barbara, you're very, very quiet. Just wanted to let you know.
I don't know why. Can you hear me at all?
Yes.
We're trying to get data from the utility company about outages. The sewer department doesn't necessarily know that the power was out at that pump station unless it overflows. So I just wanted to reiterate that that is a concern, not to be able to know exactly how many days it was out of power and the dates, so we can line it up with the storm that caused it.
When did we speak? Day before yesterday, I think.
Okay, well, but you also have, you have the outage, you have the record of when the overflows occurred.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's a good starting point. Again, ultimately, we always, there's the 100% level of documentation, which we all aspire to, right? That you could have that from the power company, and we certainly need try to get something from the power company. But starting with a starting point of, hey, we have overflows and we can document the overflows, and they were on such and such dates, and the only way they happen is because of power outages. I mean, that's at least a good starting point. Super Prob, what do you think? I mean, is that a sort of a good starting point to work back towards, or do you need those hard and fast agency records for the power?
I definitely agree with you, Dad. I think that's a great starting point, using that data that you have already to start seeing what how cost effective it is within the toolkit. And as the agency responds, we can see what other ways there are to support that data that they currently have.
No, it's a new one for me.
Question about impacts. If people had problems at their houses, that would count as damages, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we can ask them to give us some documentation of what they what happened to them.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
There's a new one in the chat from Rebecca Morrow.
Okay. Oh,
Can we
yes.
use the environmental justice screen to respond to the SVI requirements if our area is not identified above the threshold?
Yes. So absolutely. So when you look at the application, which is just it's a Word document, you just sort of fill it out, fill it in, and then add to it, and then turn it in. There's a section in there where you address the social vulnerability index, but that is only one. That's sort of an easy method that was identified to for communities to identify themselves as SVI. But it allows room for, if that isn't necessarily a trigger or isn't triggered in your community, then what else, what other justification can you give to show it as an SVI community? And using that state developed data is certainly an eligible source of data. So you would just, there's a couple questions like, is it SVI according to the SVI index? And if your answer is no, then it'll ask, okay, what else do you got? And then that's where you could list your other data. Any other questions? See anyone else hands up? Okay.
I don't see any of that.
Yep. We can give it a minute here. We got still 8 minutes left. Anyone has? Let's see. Do we just have one pop in here? Any sort of helpful hints on or high level updates I should be giving, Brian? I'm forgetting to. Since we have the time.
I think the important thing is to really work on those benefit cost analysis as soon as you can. It really is the critical path with many of these projects, unless they're planning or advanced assistance. So getting those going as soon as you can, and working with our team. We do have a technical assistance available until June 1st. And if you reach out to either of those emails that are on the screen, we'd love to set up a call with you and see if we can't help you through this process. We also encourage people, if they're late in the game to this, they still want to try to get a slice of the pie, to consider advanced assistance as a way of scoping and developing your projects. It's a great way to get your foot in the door and get funding to get started, and then hopefully get construction funding down the road through FEMA as well.
Great.
So we have a new question came in from Dan at 10:53.
Okay. Let's see, what do we got? I'm not, is it in the chat, Brian, or I'm not?
Yeah, the question says from Dan, is a PDF of the BCA report sufficient to submit at the end, or do you require any other versions? I think this came up as well earlier about sending in Excel versus, if you can't export the Excel, can you send in the PDF? Is that sufficient? That's a good question for the BCA team.
Yeah, so Supreet or Prab?
Yeah, you can actually send the actual toolkit file. There's no need to import or export the data, just the actual toolkit. And just in case the toolkit gets corrupt, it's also good to PDF get the PDF of the data.
Okay. So yeah, I think they're saying that they're unable to export an Excel file. So with that, I think, yeah, if you are having difficulties exporting the actual Excel file, then print a PDF report of the BCA and submit that, but please make sure that there are notes and comments attached for any inputs into that toolkit that are not default values.
I also haven't heard of anyone before say that, so I'm interested to know. Maybe there's maybe we could help with that to figure out if we can get the Excel file. Maybe we could do a screen share and see if we couldn't troubleshoot that too. So
yeah, I would be happy to jump on a call and walk you through getting that export correct.
it looks like we have a new question in from Aaron McKeon. Sorry if I didn't pronounce your name correctly, but repeating about advanced assistance. Thad, since my voice is a little hoarse, do you mind sharing a little more about that?
Okay, and for some reason I'm not, the questions aren't pop. Can you read me the question? I'm not
Yeah.
seeing it.
Can you repeat what you just said about advanced assistance?
Oh, okay. So advanced assistance. So the FEMA allows us to set aside up to 25% or 10 million. In the case of Ida and COVID, it's basically capped out at 10 million in what we call advanced assistance, and that is where you have identified problems, natural hazard problems in the community. Let's say flooding on the east side. That's a big problem for us. But you don't necessarily have projects identified to address. You don't have the science to determine what projects are feasible to do the mitigation. So FEMA allows for what we call advanced assistance, where they'll award sort of that upfront funding to do studies, to do design, to do benefit cost analysis, to determine it, to then develop full-on project applications. And those applications then become on the shelf, ready for a future FEMA funded grant cycle, of which there's obviously the HMGP, which comes up anytime there's a disaster, but there's also BRIC, which is Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, and FMA, which is Flood Mitigation Assistance, annually competitive nationwide grants. And BRIC last year was $1 billion. I think it's going to be somewhere around $1.5 billion this year. And FMA is 700 million each of the next 5 years consecutively. So a lot of funds there. So the advanced assistance is a way, as Brian said, to sort of come up with projects to address an identified problem, if that makes sense. The issue with it is not the issue, but sort of if you're doing pros and cons, the con is that once you get through that process, there is no then set aside funding available for the project itself. You'd apply for a future grant. There is another, there's a middle ground where it's called a phased project, whereas if you have identified problem, you have an identified project, let's say hey, we have a bridge that's way too narrow and too low, it's being overtopped, it's choking the waterway, and we know we need a new bridge, but we're not exactly sure what's the most feasible, cost-effective, and strongest mitigation design to go with. So that would be phase one. You do phase one, and at the end of phase one, if it's still cost-effective and feasible, the funding is there for phase two. And again, we're getting sort of into the weeds on sort of these more complex ways to approach it. We'd certainly love to, sit with you, talk one-on-one. But those are advanced assistance is, again, that, hey, I have a problem, I don't even know where to start type of grant. And then phase project is more, I have a problem, I have a project in mind, but I need more money to develop it fully. So hopefully that answers the questions, and certainly please reach out if you want to have a one-on-one discussion.
We had one more question come in from Warren Lucas. How do you determine the cost of the advanced assistance project?
So again, that's really up to the applicants. It's going to be basically based on your an engineer's estimate. It really is up to you. I mean, whatever it would take to whatever your project is that you've identified, the studies and engineering you need to do to look at it and develop project ideas is what your project cap would be. Sorry, I can't give a better answer than that, but if I had to, if it's big, if it's a town, you're looking at the everything, trying to figure it out, somewhere high, I don't know, a couple $100,000 maybe is the highest I think it would go. I don't know.
I would say to just look at, we can go over this one-on-one, but you can also look at the HMA guidance for advanced assistance and see what activities fit within that category, and you can kind of build a scope from there. And you can always submit something and we can try to review it, or you can work with the team to get your best guess out there. I know it's preliminary, so. Yep.
And again, we strongly encourage you to reach out. Can do a one-on-one call, really get more details from you and give you a better answer. Does a community need a SAM/gauge number or the unique federal ID, or just DUNS and federal tax ID as on the application form? So you do need SAM, and they're switching it to a new system. This is kind of down in the process weeds here. Let me, I don't know if we have anyone on. Marlene, are you still able to join us? All right, Marlene's, I think, still tied up on another with someone in her office. So, for
Sad, it's me.
Yeah.
I'm back.
There you go. Thank you, Marlene. So we have a question that came in. Does the community need to have the SAM and the gauge number, or the new unique federal ID, or just the DUNS and the federal tax ID as on the application form?
Okay, well, I know for BRIC and FMA that in order to get a FEMA Go account for those non-disaster grants, you had to have an account with sam.gov and have the DUNS number. FEMA has now changed that they're not going to be providing the funding through obligation by the DUNS number anymore. It's going to be by the UEI number. So I would have everyone, as go through the UEI number and put that down.
Okay, excellent, thanks. And Barbara, I'll say this, that new number they're coming out with, put it this way: get what you got, put what you have on the application. Certainly, if you haven't started the SAM project process, you need to get the SAM account set up. That being said, if it's a good project, otherwise eligible, and it's good to go. If there's things that you got wrong or are missing on the application, that would be an RFI item that we would ask you back for. For example, what I guess what I'm saying, if you didn't have a SAM account set up and you had a good project, I would hate to see you not submit it just because your SAM account didn't come through. I would say submit it without it. When it comes through, we get it added. Does that make sense?
I think just to clarify too, I believe that the shift is to the new unique federal ID.
Yeah.
Not the SAM. So
no, but just from experience, the SAM account is the pain. And Barb, see, it just says so SAM gauge registration is underway. May not be okay. So yeah, if you get it, Barb, please, obviously submit it with. If you don't get it, don't not submit. Just submit. We can.
That's correct. We have a lot of time, Thad, because that's how DHSES is going to be able to disperse funding
Right.
to projects moving forward. So we will have time to get that information corrected on our end.
Right. So thank you, Marlene. All right. Any other questions? Let's see, we're at
Right,
4.
your hand's still raised, so I wanted to see if you had anything else you wanted to verbally cover. Happy to discuss if you did. Just wanted to make sure. I'm assuming not. I can unmute you though if you did have a question. So just maybe add in the Q&A. I can use that as an indicator to unmute you or not.
We are 5 minutes over the hour too.
Yeah, or we can just take it to let me use these emails to follow up for more one-on-one dialogue then. Yeah.
All right, any final questions? Last call? All right, everybody. Well, we certainly appreciate your time today. We look forward to getting your applications by June 1st. If you have any, you want to schedule a one-on-one call, please do not hesitate to reach out. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.